Welcome to Rewind, an optimistic podcast that'll help you in your successful career in music. Amit Weiner hosts musicians, composers, professors, and sound wizards as they share their life stories and career decisions. Stay tuned, it's gonna be epic.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rewind, the musician's podcast, How to Grow Your Music Career. Today we have a very special guest, Clinton Pratt, owner of the Piano Sensei. Clinton, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Thank you. So could you explain to all the listeners a little bit about yourself and what is the Piano Sensei and what is it that you do?
Sure. So Piano Sensei is the name of my piano studio that I own here in Cincinnati, Ohio. We teach piano lessons, and I have some other teachers that teach for me as well. So that's the main thing that I do, is own the piano studio and teach piano.
Wonderful. And please introduce yourself also with your musical background. Where did you study? What do you do as a pianist yourself? What styles do you play? What genres are you emphasizing on and focusing on?
Yeah, let's see. Do you want the short version or the long version?
Let's start with the long. If it's too long, I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll go in. I was going to start from the beginning, but maybe I'll go in reverse. So yeah, I have a piano studio, and I've been teaching for a little over 20 years. And we teach all styles really, because my experience is in a variety of things, not just classical. So I went to school for piano performance. So that's mainly classical. I have a bachelor's and a master's in piano performance. But I also grew up playing in church and did a lot of improvisation and doodling around at the piano, and so I've got that too. And I've studied some jazz, and I like doing all that stuff too. And I come from a musical family, so there was always singing around the piano at family get-togethers and holidays, and my parents both sang and toured in singing groups, and my older sister played piano, and I also played trombone in school and marching band in high school, and that was actually my major in college. First was trombone, and I minored in piano, and then I switched to piano, major and minor in composition. So I've got a variety, kind of a diverse background, and I use that in my studio too. So I want my students to be able to play, not just read music, but play by ear and improvise and have a wide understanding of how everything works. And I also incorporate Dalcroze eurythmics, which, if anybody is not familiar with that, is basically using the body to experience and learn music. So it's a lot of movement, and I have training in that, and I'm certified through the American Eurythmic Society. What else? Is that good? You want more?
That's perfect. And on your website, pianosensei.com, your tagline is "Discover Your Inner Musician," which is something I really emphasize with, and it really aligns with my agenda as well as a teacher and as a musician. I mean, discover your inner musician. So could you please elaborate a little bit about that? I mean, for me, let's say, for example, it might be that anyone has an inner musician in him or her, even if they're not professional musicians. Is it something that you also put focus on with people that are not professional musicians, but are coming to find their inner musician and, elevate their lives and talents with that as well?
Right, exactly. So, yes, I believe that everybody has the potential inside of them, and then sometimes it gets suppressed. So people might say, "Oh, I'm not musical," or I'm tone deaf, or I can't carry a tune, But probably when they were little children, they were, they could. We know little kids move around and dance to music when they hear it just instinctively, which is also related to the Dalcroze eurythmics approach, because he believed that, it's inside of us. And so we tap into that by doing physical activities and all that. So yes, discover your inner musician, because it is in there. So it's either just suppressed or needs unlocked somehow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you said that you opened. What is piano sensei? What is sensei, first of all?
Yeah, so it's a Japanese word, and I grew up in Japan, so that's sort of that influence. I have kind of Japanese theme in my studio, but sensei is Japanese. People think of it as teacher, but really it's the first part, sen, is before or ahead, and the second part, sei, is life. So it's before you in life or ahead of you in life. So the idea is a sensei is someone who has been there and has the experience. So piano sensei is, you could think of it as just piano teacher, but really it's more than teacher. It's like wise piano one, basically.
Interesting. And what do you find these days when we have, let's jump into the question that I'm asking all the guests, and it's the hot topic these days. So we have AI generated music, and AI is all over the place. And how do you find, as a piano teacher and as a pianist yourself, how do you find people that are coming to your studio and playing the piano themselves, maybe for the first time, or improving their skills from lesson to lesson? What do you think these skills of playing the piano can have as benefits for people these days?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a variety of things that it can do. I mean, some people just want to play for their own enjoyment. They want to play something that they heard and like, and so they want to recreate that themselves. Now, when you say AI, were you asking specifically about that?
Yeah, so I mean, these days we have like machines, AI, that are generating music, and a lot of musicians are afraid that AI will replace us as musicians. So what is your take on that as a piano teacher and as a pianist yourself?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think, AI could probably, compose pieces and create music just based on formulas and, scanning the world repertoire of everything that's been created and making something. But yeah, I don't think we can ever really recreate the human sort of influence or impact, So, or even if AI could like compose a piece, it's still probably better to have a human play it, because there's so much nuance, with a human being able to interpret and express certain things, even just the tiniest fluctuations of dynamics, and phrasing and pushing and pulling and adjusting tempo naturally, not being so robotic. So I think it can probably help, but I don't think it's going to, make musicians, what's the word? Defunct.
Unemployed.
Unemployed. Yeah.
That's the word we are all afraid of. But actually, it's very interesting what you've mentioned, because all the AI music that I've heard of, and I'm sure all the listeners are aware of platforms like Suno and Udio, that these days are very in the news almost each and every day. So almost all the music that I've heard from those platforms are always with a click and a metronome, and a very strict metronomic pulse. And actually, what you've said is very interesting, because I've never heard a computer play, let's say, an Chopin nocturne in a way that will sound like a human being, with all the, what you've said, all the tiny fluctuations in the tempo and the breathing and all the things that you as a teacher probably teach your students to do when they play Chopin. You don't put a metronome and play the Chopin like da da di da di da dam dam dam, like
Right.
beating on the piano. So that's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way that you play metronomically. I rarely put on a metronome for students. It's okay, to just make sure you have the rhythm correct, or however it's supposed to work out mathematically. But then when you actually play it, yeah, no, you never stay strict, and you can hear professional recordings, and you're never going to be able to have a consistent click, even with Bach or something where it's supposed, people think is very strict pulse with a rhythmic momentum. Even, there's going to be fluctuations even in Bach.
Yeah. So I think we can divide the talk, Clinton, into a couple of sections. First of all, we can discuss a little bit more further the classical piano, and you as a teacher and as a pianist. And then also, I think something that will be very interesting for the listeners, because it is a podcast about career in music and opportunities in the musical career. So I think it will be also very interesting to ask you about you as an entrepreneur that has a business that you own and has people that you employ. So I think that will be the second section of the episode. But first of all, what led you to develop an interest in music? I mean, was that something that you thought when you were 6 or 7 years old that you will always be a musician, or was it in a later stage?
Yeah, so like I said before, I have come from a musical family, so it was sort of just always around. And my older sister played piano, took piano lessons. She's 6 years older than me, and she would sit me up on the piano with her and show me some things when I was 2, 3 years old. I don't even remember, so that was like our playtime together. She would show me things she had learned, and here, just play this middle C, and and then she'd play with me. So I was just I was exposed to it at a young age, and so I didn't really feel like there was a moment where I decided, oh, I think I like music and I want to play music. It was just something that was just kind of normal that I always did.
And if you were not a musician, what would you be?
I would be an architect.
Really?
I loved architecture. I always did. In fact, even when I was probably 8, 9 years old, I thought I was going to be an architect. I never thought I would be a, professional musician or piano teacher or even own a studio. Like I said, that was just always part of my life. But I loved architecture. I would draw house plans and floor plans, and I would ask my family members and friends, what do you want in your house? Do you want, a courtyard and this? And then I would draw it out. And I loved going to open houses and just looking at houses. And it's interesting because I've heard, I don't know if this is a famous quote, but that architecture is like frozen music.
Yeah, I think it's by either Einstein or Picasso, but I'm not sure who said that.
Yeah.
I know that quote, yeah.
And so it's interesting that those two things are big passions in my life, and they are kind of similar. They're both, they both combine structure and math, with creativity and everything. Architecture has you've got the whole engineering aspect and the math, and things should be symmetrical or not, and all that worked out, plus the creative aspect. It's kind of an art. And then same with music. You have the structure and the form and the rhythm, but then their creativity.
That's so interesting. I'm a composer and I teach composition. I'm a professor of composition at the Jerusalem Academy of Music. And when I teach students to compose, that's actually teaching them architecture. I mean, I'm using all the time terms like form and even the term architecture, and like the shape of the piece. That's almost all the things we discuss. I almost never discuss whether it's better to put there a C sharp or a C natural. I don't, and I tell the students, I don't like to put a lot of focus on that tiny, little details. I always put focus on the architecture of the piece. For example, I'll just say an example. I always tell all the students that every piece, every musical piece, every song has only one and a very significant climax. So only one climax in any piece, whether it's a Rachmaninov moment musical or a Tchaikovsky symphony or a Beethoven symphony, always you will find only one musical climax. So that analogy is very interesting between music and architecture.
Yeah.
What are your ideas about that? What would you say is similar between music and architecture?
Well, yeah, like I said, I think it combines the logical and mathematical aspects with creativity and expression, or you could even think of it as like left brain, right brain. If you believe in that stuff, the logical and analytical plus the whole and the creative.
Mm-hmm. That both music and architecture are using both hemispheres of the brain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's interesting. And as a classical pianist, you say you play classical and also jazz, right, Clinton?
Mm-hmm.
So when you teach students, is it both classical and jazz? Is it in the same lesson, or do you give each student a choice between studying classical or jazz? How do you? What is your methodology in teaching piano?
Right. It's definitely depending on the student and their preferences. And just to be clear, I sort of dabble in jazz, so I wouldn't say I'm a jazz musician, but I know how to fake it. But right, so I can handle it, but I'm not like a professional jazz musician. But I can, I teach improvisation, which is in a lot of styles, not just jazz and blues. But yes, to answer your question about students, it really depends on them and their interests. Sometimes they don't really know or care. They just want to play piano. So then we'll do all kinds of things. We'll read music and play classical and do some improv and all that. Or sometimes they do have a preference. They are entering middle school and they're going to be in their jazz band, and their director gave them a thing. Oh my gosh, please help me with how to solo for this thing in my jazz band. So that's very specific.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a little bit more about the improvisation part, because in one of the previous episodes, and I'm suggesting all the listeners to have a listen to it, we've discussed very in detail about improvisation and all the aspects of improvisation. And when you've said improvisation, did you mean jazz improvisation or free improvisation or even improvisation in the classical genres? What kind of improvisation do you do with your students?
Any and all of the above. Yeah. So when I say improvisation, that's even starting from the very first lesson with a 5-year-old student. Here, let's make sounds like a bird. What would that be like? Or what is this? And it's even with no knowledge of scales and theory, just making up sounds. That's what improvisation is, right? So just starting from the very beginning, and then maybe just black keys. Here, we're going to play 3 black keys, copy after me, or do something like me. And, going back and forth, just that can become pentatonic scale, adding the 2 black keys. And then let's add a white key, throw the A in there. Now you got the blues scale, right? And so, yeah, I like using improvisation in any style or most styles. The more, the better. You can improvise with creating different moods and styles, right? We can make circus music or something that sounds like a scary movie, or blues or jazz, or let's make it sound classical. How can you improvise to sound like Mozart? So all of the above.
Wow. So with each and every student, you always put some kind of focus into improvisation.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very important because to me, it's a fundamental skill. A lot of people think it's an advanced skill. Oh, I can't improvise until I know everything about theory. And, that's almost like composition or something. Like, oh, I'm not going to write a piano piece because I don't know anything. But to me, improvisation is fundamental because you're just playing. Like you're just doing what it is that you do. It's just like speaking. So when you learn to speak a language as a child, you're improvising. I mean, you're copying the words and the sounds, and you're forming sentences that you never rehearsed. It's not scripted. You're having conversations. You're starting to make sentences. And that's what I think every musician should be able to do is make music, like just play something, right? It shouldn't be some scary, intimidating, or advanced skill.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you so much. I mean, it also resonated with me that as a composition teacher, a part of composition is actually improvisation. Most of the initial part of the composition is usually comes from improvisation, and it's not only that I'm saying it. I mean, all the great composers of the past said that like all the ideas came through improvisation, either on the piano or on any other instrument. And I also agree with you very much with what you've said. I mean, I've had a lot of students in the past that were struggling with improvisation. Usually it's like classical pianists or classical musicians that were very much used to playing only from sheet music and from scores. And then when you ask them, okay, let's play something. So they are, like freezing on the piano. Okay, but what should I play? So how do you find that? How do you help people overcome that feeling of, okay, so what do you want me to play when you find people that are struggling with improvisation? What would be your tips?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's one of my favorite things to do is figure out what can help a student and even help teachers, because you'd be surprised, many music teachers or piano teachers can't do it or are afraid. And so I've given lots of workshops all over the country for piano teachers, how to teach improvisation or how to even get better at it yourself so that you can teach it. And now to answer, more specifically your question, I always give parameters because, if you just say, okay, why don't you just make something up? It's almost debilitating. Like, where do I start? I've got 88 keys. I got both hands. I got 10 fingers. I have infinite options of rhythms. I have, 12 major keys. Am I going to play in this key or that key? What chords? I mean, what are you going to do? It's overwhelming. So always give parameters and start simple. For example, let's just play 2 black keys or 3 black keys. So some kind of restriction. Okay, let's just play a melody using 3 black keys. And also, I think it's very helpful to take turns and go back and forth between the teacher and the student. So instead of just, okay, go, ready, like perform for me and I'm going to sit back, but it can be an interactive thing, and so that it's not as scary. Here, you play a couple notes, I'll play a couple notes. Or even you, the teacher, can create an accompaniment. Even if it's like a drone, like a fifth or something in the bass, like just play something that's continuous, and then you're going back and forth with a melody. So whatever it is, or wherever the student is, just meet them there, make it as easy as possible for them to just keep a flow, and then you can expand from there with doing other keys, or let's add your left hand, a single bass note, or a fifth, or whatever.
Yeah, I think these are great tips. It's like a talk between 2 people. I mean, let's say, for example, I would say, and you said before we started recording that you also have a podcast. So, what is the name of your podcast for all the listeners to also go have a listen to?
Yeah, it's called The Piano Sensei Way, and it's for piano teachers. And we focus on 2 aspects mainly: teaching piano and the business aspect of running a studio.
Okay, so and that we will discuss in a second. But what I wanted to say is that it's exactly like a talk that when we talk with each like two person. So I'm asking a question, you answer, and if I would say, okay, this is Clinton, please, Clinton, now you can talk for an hour like straight. That's always like more intimidating than having a talk. That's like you said before. Okay, now play me a 5-minute improvisation with a structure and build it like architecturally convincing. So I really agree with those tips that you've said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's much easier to speak on the piano and to have a dialogue with the teacher. And also the thing that you've said about limitations and restrictions, that's also something that resonates with me as a composition teacher. Let's say I'm always asked by the students, why do we study, let's say, counterpoint, species counterpoint? So one of the reasons I think is that the limitations and the restrictions can make you very creative, because you need to be creative, but you have so many rules. Let's say in species counterpoint, you have so many rules, but you still can be more creative because of all the rules that restricted you.
Yes, and I've even had students who could improvise on the piano, but it was really just one style or one thing. For example, a student that would play just like they knew chords, and so they would play just a bunch of like broken chords and arpeggios and things, right? And I'm thinking, okay, well, you don't even have a melody. Like, can you just play a melody, right? So one of those restrictions for that student is, okay, just your right hand and just one note at a time. So like, don't play chord, just play a melody. And so that was a little hard for that student at first, but then once they developed, oh yeah, okay, now I can play a nice melody. Now I'm going to figure out how to accompany it and add more to it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so let's go to the second section of the episode about business and the thing that you've said, how to run a studio, how to have other teachers work for you, how to market it and find students. What would be the things that you would focus and help the listeners if they want to start their own studio regarding marketing and all other business aspects of running a studio?
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a lot. So for me, it was gradual as far as going from, no students to owning my own studio. I didn't start by, opening a studio and here, let me find a place and now I have to pay rent and hope I get everybody and let's hurry up. Mine was gradual, which was nice. So if you can find a way to do something gradual, meaning maybe, you're teaching for somebody else or at another school and building up, a reputation that way, and then think about opening, your own. However, you can, just decide to start a studio and open a studio. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a commercial location where you have to purchase it or pay rent. You could start it in your home, or you could even start by travel teaching. I know a lot of teachers that do that, because not only do you not need a physical location, but you don't even need a piano, right? Because you're traveling to students. You can do house calls, so you could start that way. And then as far as marketing, I found that the best thing is word of mouth, but that doesn't help if you don't have anybody yet, right? So if you're just starting, no one's going to say, "Oh, Clinton's a great teacher, go to him," right? So that will build over time, but you could even start by offering, like a free lesson to somebody and then have them write a testimonial for your website, that kind of thing. Just get started somehow so that you can start getting the referrals and word of mouth. But definitely a website is important. And I do a whole talk. Actually, one of my podcast episodes is how to have a more effective website. So we could go into details on that. But website is important for it to attract people and point them to the right step.
Interesting. And it's interesting that you've said that the best marketing is word of mouth. So, I mean, do you also, let's say, have a Facebook promoted posts that are targeted in your area or something like that, at least at the beginning or even now? Is that one of the marketing tools that you're using?
No, although I have tried that. So like I said, I have tried. I've done Facebook ads and boosting posts, and I've done Google ads, and I've done some other things. I've spent a lot on marketing things and doing ads and posters and handing out flyers. But nothing much comes from those. So maybe just a little bit. Mostly it's referrals. So at least that's my experience. I'm not saying those things don't work. They could work, but just that's all I can speak to, is that really the best thing is word of mouth. So just get started, get people who are happy with you, and so that they can tell other people and write reviews and testimonials.
That's interesting. And how big is the Piano Sensei studio these days? How many students approximately? How many teachers do you employ?
Yeah, so we have about 75 students a week, private
That's a lot.
students. So
Wow.
yeah, it's decent. It's not huge. And then we have 6 teachers right now. So they're all part-time, so most of them just teach 1 or 2 days a week.
So when a student is coming to the studio, does he choose his own teacher, or do you do like a discussion with the teachers? What's the best teacher for each student?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we offer a free trial lesson, and they can book that right on the website, and you'll see that's the only button. So that's an important thing on your website. You just want one call to action so people don't get confused of what to do. So they just book a free trial lesson, and then that's with me. So they come to the studio. I want to meet them because I'm meeting the parents. They are the clients, although we have adult students too. So I want to meet them, talk to them. I show them the studio. I give them the tour. We talk about things, and then we'll have a little sample lesson. And part of that is me assessing the student. What can they do? What do they know? Even if they're a beginner, what's their dexterity? Can they copy a rhythm? Do they know the alphabet? These kind of things. And then after that, once they enroll, then I will assign them the instructor based on the availability and what I think is a good fit.
Interesting. So I want to ask you about talent. I mean, this is one of the things that always troubled me, and a lot of parents were asking me during the years, okay, so I'm paying for the, for the lessons. Is the boy talented? Will he be a musician? And I was always struggling not to answer. I mean, that's my own agenda, and I was wondering what is yours. I was always struggling not to answer because I'm not a prophet, first of all. And to say to a parent, let's say, he will be a musician for sure, that's something that, okay, you will come and 20 years afterwards, you said, or even vice versa. If you said, he will never be a musician, and then he's the next Gustavo Dudamel or something like that. So did you find those questions yourself, and how do you deal with them?
Yeah, that's very good. It's a very controversial topic. Yeah, personally, I think some people might have, a lean or a proclivity towards being a musician. But just like my website says, discover your inner musician. I think anybody can do it. And there's a lot to be said for skill and practicing. So in fact, this might seem strange, but I almost find it insulting if somebody tells me I'm talented. If I play and they say, oh, you're so talented. And I'm almost annoyed because I'm like, no, I practiced.
That's beautiful.
Like,
I mean, when you were 5 years old, talented is a nice thing to say.
Yeah, I worked a lot. I practiced hard. Like, I'm not just like, oh, I just sit down and I can play this Beethoven sonata. I mean, that would be genius. Just coming out of the womb and I can do this. Like, I practiced a lot, many, many, many years and thousands of hours, and like 5 hours a day in grad school, and still a lot. And I still don't feel like I can do the Beethoven sonata justice, So, oh, you're so talented. I'm like, no, I practiced. But as far as, yeah, if somebody asks me that about their child, like, oh, or like if we have a trial lesson and then they ask me, so do you think he's talented? Is it, I sort of, like you, I try to be diplomatic, but sometimes I just tell them my belief, just like I told you. I say, well, I'm not sure. It's hard to tell. I definitely think he can do it. And, if he practices, it'll pay off. So I kind of just focus on that.
Yeah, I know it's a controversial topic, and I'm find myself dealing with this a lot when I'm meeting teenagers, especially teenagers like from the age of 12 to 18. Just to share with you, I was last week in a session that I taught film music to teenagers at the age of 15. And one of the things I found myself talk about more than film music was, don't ever listen to anybody that is saying to you, you're not going to be a musician. Because if people are saying that to you, either they are frustrated themselves, or they tried it and they didn't succeed, or somebody told them that and they are just conveying that message to you. But just, nobody's a prophet. And if somebody says, you will never be a musician, don't ever listen. I mean, that's how I find it myself, because I've heard that sentence so many times. I don't know if you have, but I've heard it so many times myself. So that's one of the messages. That's, by the way, one of the reasons that I have this podcast, Rewind, and I have a similar podcast in Hebrew. And it's called also an optimistic podcast about career in music. That's the tagline of the podcast, because I've always found that optimism and, positive thinking are the best tools for you to succeed in life, and not to listen to people that are saying this is not possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And how do you answer the parents that are asking you, do you think he will be a musician? I mean, okay, talented, we understand he has some potential and so on, but will he be a musician? What are you answering to those questions?
I would say, well, he already is a musician. He just doesn't know it yet. So
wonderful.
I would say something like that, that just kind of throws them off, but it is true. Like, I'm not lying. That is really what I believe, so yeah, just like I said before, I think everybody is a musician. That's just human nature. So it's in there somewhere. You just haven't unlocked it or nurtured it.
That's a beautiful sentence, and I'll try to cut it and put it as a teaser at the beginning of the episode. And Clinton, before we end this wonderful and very inspiring episode, we started with you in Japan and the explanation of Sensei. So what tips do you have for someone starting out in the music world today, from your own experience, both as a musician and also as an entrepreneur in music? What tips would you give?
Yeah, I would say follow your passion and don't worry about making money. I mean, you might need money, we all do, but don't make that the primary thing, because a lot of people, get discouraged thinking, oh, well, I love this, but I don't know if I can make a career out of that, but people make a career out of all kinds of things. And so just, if you do what you love, I think it'll happen. And, a lot of people, they don't think they can be successful as a musician, but there are so many things. So not just performing, right? As you know, composing, music production, teaching, running a school, making YouTube tutorials, creating online courses, doing judging, By the way, I've done and do all those things. So that's another thing, is that it doesn't have to be one thing, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be lots, and they can all be related to music if you love music or not.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end the episode. And you are an entrepreneur. So I've met a few days ago an entrepreneur in music also that has a couple of music schools here in my country. And he said, before I was a professional musician and had all those schools, I had a restaurant that I managed. And afterwards, I started a startup about medical issues. And in both areas, I didn't have any clue. So I'm a serial entrepreneur, and now I'm in music. So if you are a true entrepreneur, and as you've said yourself, you have so many things that you've done throughout your career, digital courses, YouTube tutorials, podcast, piano studio, and you said a couple of more. So if you are finding a variety of ways to make a living, so you will be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, don't worry, because worrying is just using your imagination to create something you don't want. And why would you do that?
Wonderful. So once again, Clinton Pratt, Piano Sensei, thank you so much for being on the show and for joining the episode.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Clinton, how can people find you? What is your website and what is your podcast again? Can you repeat those for the listeners?
The Piano Sensei Way is the podcast. And you can go to thepianosenseiway.com for that. And there's also tabs for other things that I do on there. If you search Piano Sensei, you might also come upon my studio website. So that's pianosensei.com. That's, to get people to come to my studio to take lessons. But as far as teaching and things for teachers and the podcast, that's the Piano Sensei Way.
Wonderful. And I'll put the descriptions, I'll put the links in the description to the episode. So Clinton, once again, thank you so much for being on the show. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please feel free to rate the podcast and give it a follow. And you can put a review on Apple Podcast or a comment on Spotify. So feel free to do that. And I'll see you in the next episode with another awesome guest. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Rewind, an optimistic podcast that'll help you in your successful career in music. Amit Weiner hosts musicians, composers, professors, and sound wizards as they share their life stories and career decisions. Stay tuned, it's gonna be epic.